Hi, Katie.
Hi.
So you have the Board of Selectmen and Jess and Kelly and I in front of you, and we're about to just open a discussion on the tabled zoning bylaws for special town meeting. Mr.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi there.
Katie.
Katie, this is Bob Weinstein. I just want to thank you for making yourself available for this conversation. I'm sure your presence will be needed at some point. Anyway, I am opening the conversation. The first item in my packet is the proposed house size bylaw for the residential district. So, having said that, who would like to begin and comment on this? I have a number of comments, but I would like to reserve those and give the opportunity for my colleagues to weigh in on the language that is in front of us, and this language, I assume, is what will be in front of the special town meeting. So, Maureen.
Just by way of introduction, I'm sure everybody knows this, but the calculation for this was roughly based on the amendment that passed in 2017, the zoning amendment, which limited house size within the Seashore District, which was, as you recall, taken on legal advisement as being the model being lot size to house size ratio as being a defensible one. Right, Katie? Hello?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks. So what the planning board produced was a maximum house size. The thing that was different was that, as you know, a lot size in the Seashore, minimum lot residential lot size is 3 acres, and they came up with a maximum size of 36 plus or minus 200 additional feet based on acreage plus or less, and then prorated by a fractions thereof. This one is slightly different. They carefully looked at the lot size, the smallest lot size permissible in Truro, which is 3/4 of an acre, and they came up with using a similar maximum house size on that lot dimension because most of the lots outside the seashore are smaller and do have that dimension. So they also then made a model where you could have 300 additional square feet for every additional acre, or less for and then any rate proportion of that would be prorated on 300 square feet. So I didn't do a very good job of summarizing that, and if anybody wants to jump in.
Well, I have a question about the chart. I think we need a 3/4 acre because that's the majority of the size home property in Truro.
Yes.
So instead of starting with an acre, I think we should have here the 3/4 acre and what by right and up to, and there's the same way. It starts with an acre, but I think we should start with 3/4 acre because that's the
model.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
And because it's a little, you have to kind of figure it out here on page 2, the bottom of the page. For a lot less than 1 acre, the square foot shall be reduced by 150 square feet for each half acre or fraction thereof. I think we should have that out there rather than having people try to figure out the majority of the lots are 3/4.
So it'd be 75 square feet for a 1/4 acre, right?
Is that right? Yeah, my math is...
Well, in the,
No,
Go ahead, Jeff.
no, it would be, if you had like an acre and a quarter, let's say, and you wanted to enlarge your house, you would take a quarter or 0.225 of 300 square feet.
But we're
Which
No, we're
gives you-
talking about 3/4 acre lots.
3/4 acre lot, not a bigger acre lot. Jess, why don't we let Jess?
Well, that's the 3/4 acres is the 3,600 square feet
Right.
that you get in the sub 1 on page 2, so we could add that by right.
Oh, 3,600.
Yeah, so-
It's in B1.
That's the allowed, exactly, that's the allowed by right.
Oh, here,
That's the
okay.
first
All right.
size, and then sub 2 is the special permit. I know the wording's kind of funky. Later on, I did a lot during our public hearing, trying to figure out how to make it as clear as possible and get our point across. Because you prorate it, it's 68 square feet per each, like, 0.225 quarter acres is how it gets, is how the math works out under that B sub 1. Because that's where that 68 square feet for 1 acre of land comes from. But we calculated it initially based on the 0.775 because that was the minimum lot size.
So that means 3,600 for 3/4 acre,
Exactly.
3,668 by right.
By right.
For 1
Or
acre.
with
For 1
special
acre.
1
permit.
acre.
No, but with special permit, a 3/4 acre could go to 3,668.
By special permit, we could add up to,
No, 3668 is by right.
Is by
what's-
right.
what's
I'm
by
talking
right.
3/4 acre now. 3,600 for a 3/4 acre.
Correct.
correct, yep.
And then what's with special permit?
46.
Not to
No.
make
No.
sense.
Isn't it, Jess?
It's,
46.
yes, it's
46.
46,
For a
because it's the
3/4
additional,
acre?
Yeah.
exactly, because that's the additional 1,000 square feet.
So it's 36 for 3/4, and then by special permit, they can add 1,000 square feet.
And then you get the extra 1,000 square feet for the
ADU.
ADU.
Which is, so if the ADU were in the structure, because accessory dwelling units can actually be part of the structure,
Mhm.
so then that would add an additional 1,000
1,000.
feet,
Exactly.
square feet. But that also would apply if the ADU was in a, truly an accessory dwelling.
Yes, yep, exactly. And they would have to apply through the planning board for that as well.
Right,
on that.
right.
Well, what does everybody think about putting that on the chart?
The 3/4?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
definitely.
that's- I think that's
Yeah,
I think that's a good
important.
idea.
Doesn't
Doesn't
change the bylaw.
No,
Right,
but
right,
it calls
just-
It's in the
people-
comment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Right,
think
just-
it's a good idea.
clarified it.
Great.
So, I'm trying to figure out where that 1,000 square feet comes from for an increase with special permit.
It was based on the seashore model.
Yeah, yes.
But where does it say it in the bylaw?
Is it under the?
It doesn't really say
Oh,
it
no.
specifically, it just shows, it just, the second sentence of sub 2, no special permit may be issued if it would result exceeding in the 4,600 square feet.
And does the math work out?
It
No,
does because of that prorated, that 68 square
alright, I
feet.
just want to make sure.
But yes, we didn't
In-
say it specifically.
On
that it's
page
more.
2, under B2, it says, "No special permit may be issued for any construction if the construction would result in a total gross floor area exceeding 4,600 square feet." So there's the...
Yeah, okay.
So that's the cap, and it's the,
Right.
For 1 acre, that's the cap.
Yeah,
Correct.
so it's the same for 3/4 acre
No.
than it is for 1
No.
acre?
No.
4,600.
Confusing.
46,
It's very confusing.
68 for...
It's
for
really
one.
confusing.
Right, and minimum lots, yeah, it says residential minimum lot size.
Katie, any thoughts in there?
hello?
Hello? Okay.
Sorry, I'm here. I'm going to have to confess that I haven't looked at this one as carefully as the marijuana one, so I hear what you're saying, but,
Okay.
and Jess, if you have that most recent version available,
Yeah.
then
I can
that
probably
would
send it to you.
be.
Yeah, let me see if I can forward it to you.
And, you know, I'm just asking these questions because we're
Yeah.
going to get them on the floor,
Yeah.
so.
No, I think it's
just-
very
Yeah.
insightful.
Yeah.
We have to be able to
Foresight.
explain them, right?
So basically what it's saying is that you can go up to 4,600 square feet for a minimum lot size, and up to 4668 for 1 acre land. It's not that you would automatically get another, you would have to apply for something up to that amount.
For the special permit?
Yes.
Yes. And then you can get plus, so if, and then if you have an acre, like a contiguous acre, then you can get an additional 300 square feet, or prorated based on the
So if
acreage.
it's half an acre, you get 150.
Exactly.
All right, it makes sense now. So I think the confusion is the chart's in the comment and it's illustrating what it says in here.
Right.
Because what's in there is a little hard to visualize without seeing it in the chart.
I also think it might have been helpful, there are a couple of things to me in terms of information. Since I was around for the argument when we went from half-acre minimum zoning to three-quarter acre, I think there may be questions about, well, what happens if I own a half-acre? Because there are a lot of half-acre
Right,
lots
right.
existing. And then the other thing, and this is kind of a philosophical problem that I have with this whole thing, is it says in the cover letter and later in the language of the bylaw, well, it's actually comments. It says in the cover letter, this bylaw seeks to protect and preserve the unique rural character of Truro. And in the comments, this is the thing above the chart that Dan was referring to, it says, the sentence reads, the proliferation of large houses alters the environmental and economic and social fabric of the community, and for Truro often makes it no longer affordable. And then below, it talks about the seashore, et cetera, et cetera. So, full disclosure here, I own property in the seashore that's larger than 4 acres. I objected to what happened there, that's old news. But the new news is there's no baseline here, and I think this information is available from the assessor's office. I'd like to know what the average house size is in the residential district, excluding the seashore, because if you look at this bylaw in its practical application, and I have to personalize this, on my 4 acres, I can only have what someone with 3/4 of an acre has, and if the goal is to preserve whatever it means, the rural character of Truro, you're allowing for quite large houses on relatively small lots. I own more than 4 times the lot size of the minimum current legal lot, not grandfathered, but the 3/4 acre. So what you're allowing is for the possibility with a special permit of going up to 4,600. It's a big house. And does that preserve the rural character? I don't think so. So I think the commentary above the chart, it talks about the proposed future size limits for the residential district reflect prevailing building sizes outside the seashore. Number one, I don't believe that. I think that a figure, because this was done in one of the demographic and, affordability studies, I have a feeling that the average was around 20, it was 2,000 something square feet. I'm not sure, I don't want to say the number. Maureen, do you have the number?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, so I'm looking at a handout, a flyer from One Truro, who, as you know, worked hard on this with members of the planning board, and they quote a fact that says 50% of the homes in Truro are less than 2,000 square feet. Fewer than 11% of the homes in Truro are over 3,200 square feet. There are 30 homes over 5,000 square feet. They also go on to say that in their forums and with feedback from people, that many people were in favor of using exactly the same limits as outside the seashore as those used within the seashore. 2/3 of the respondents on a survey. So they recognize that, but I think, and Jess, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they were trying to make it as palatable as possible to the greatest number of people. So.
Yeah, that's correct. That's kind of
I understand that, but what I don't understand is that if you want to preserve the character of the town, whatever that means, you've got to start by looking at what the actual buildable landscape is in Truro, meaning the existing houses. And from what Maureen said, the majority, although we don't have a figure, but where it says, I'm looking at Maureen's notes here, 50% of the homes are less than 2,000 square feet. So if you want to maintain that, and it's curious that I'm taking this position, we're encouraging very large, well, they're large houses for small lots. And I feel what's good for the goose is good for the gander. If I have 4 acres and I can only have 3,600 square feet, or up to, I think in the seashore, Maureen, correct me, 46 with a special permit, is that correct?
Correct, and for your additional acre, you could have increased square footage.
Right, but it's in the same ballpark, and I live in a house that's about 3,000 square feet. And I do have outbuildings, but I personalize it because it's something I know about. And also because I'm on the water a lot. If you go out on the bay and look back at the coast of Truro, and Paul and Jan certainly can, I think, agree or correct me. If you look at the coastline of Truro from South Truro, meaning, before you get to Great Island, blah, 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 and you go all the way north to Beach Point, that's where the majority of large homes are currently. They've all been built in the last 3 decades. And most of those homes are 4,000 square feet or plus. And so I really question, what is this actually doing? And do we want the community, broadly speaking, to have houses up to 4,600 square feet on a 3/4 lot? Think about the, new subdivisions that post-date half-acre zoning, 3/4. I don't have an answer. I just find this complicated, and I think it leaves out a very important thing, which is baseline information, what currently exists in town. And Maureen, thank you for that, because somewhere, Ray, am I misremembering? Something came at some point, and it may have been during the discussion about the zoning for the seashore, from the assessor's office about what the average square footage was.
Just sent John an email.
Okay, thank you. Because I think that, to have a public discussion, that makes sense.
I mean, I think that 50% of them are 2,200 square feet or smaller, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But I asked him if he could pull that information.
No, I can see it.
Take that.
I'm sure she got that
Thank you for
information
bringing that.
from the assessor, but let's see what John responds with.
Anyway, that's just my take. And if you're trying to preserve, if you think about our water table, land that is recoverable in storm situations, I'm not good at math, but it's easy to figure out what the percentage of coverage of a lot is, if you had a 1-story or a 2-story building. And the demands on the environment, both for septic and water use, increase as the house size increases. Fortunately, Title V limits, that's figured in relation to how many bedrooms you have, but it doesn't say square footage. So I'm just throwing that out. I mean, I have a problem with what's presented. And Jan, I think I'm really glad that you drew attention to the chart, because again.
Well, that's what, yeah, and now, I mean, because I agree, 4,600 square feet on a 3/4 acre lot is a big house. And that doesn't really, I don't know the numbers, but I think it's larger than most.
Oh,
Oh,
without a
yeah.
doubt.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
mean-
I think they're less than 2,000
Yeah.
square feet on half-acre lots, so they're
Yeah.
probably closer to 2,500.
It's bigger, most of you at this table have seen my property. It's bigger than my garage, my house, and the guest house combined. That's
And
4,600 square
this
feet.
also means, if I'm doing this math right, a half-acre lot would be allowed something like 3,530
Yep.
on a half-acre lot. That's a huge house for
No, it is. How
So
did
you're
they
a
get,
really tall house.
this numbers came,
But they wouldn't be building now on a half acre. They can't. It has to be 3/4.
But what if they wanted to expand their house? What if they wanted to rip down and build on existing
Half acre
site.
lot.
Yeah, because the half acre's
Yeah.
grandfather. You know,
Right.
in the seashore, there are some very small lots, you know, even though the lot size stated is 3/4, that's because the federal government said minimum if you want to do anything. They were trying to prevent people from building who had 2.3 acres or something, but there are a lot of 2-acre lots, so.
Yeah, the truth is that I don't think, I understand taking the model of the seashore, but I don't think it's taking into account, you know, just the financial or the value aspect. I mean, for the most part, I don't want to make big generalizations, but for the most part, as Bob said, the issues have been with houses up on the expensive bluffs, you know,
Mhm.
expensive houses.
They
So
said that almost 60% of there are 30 homes over 5,000 square feet. Almost 60% of those have been built since 2005. And there is a ZBA public hearing that was scheduled in June, I don't know what happened, for a special permit to increase a house from 4,000 to 7,000.
that's up on.
I think that's cool.
That's.
It's
we're
John,
still- still talking
John,
about it.
Yeah,
it's the
Yeah,
Thornley.
yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Anyway, so for the most part, 3/4 acre lots are not going to, generally speaking, have people buying them that want to put up a gigantic house. It's just not, so, I mean, are we throwing a big monkey wrench into this if we?
No, because this is gonna come up at the meeting, is like, what's a number everybody can be satisfied with, but, and then honors what Bob has pointed out, if we're trying to have sustainability and think about protecting place, which is conservation is why this is such a unique place to live, how do we do that?
Right,
And
no,
we
I
get
mean in the
something-
process here, you know, we need to be ready for town meeting, is what I'm saying,
So I think,
time-wise.
so I think, let me just say that there are also people who believe that these numbers
Are not big enough.
are not
Big
big
enough,
enough.
yes.
And there was objection to this by people, and I actually had some builders contact me about it. That's neither here nor there, because I don't believe they're voters, but, Katie, if the board wanted to change these numbers, what would the process be at this point? Would it have to be on town meeting floor to make it within the scope of what the planning board approved?
Yeah, so Ryan, you and I have discussed this a little bit about making these changes. Now, obviously, the board controls the warrant, and the board has the ability to make any changes to these articles that it would like to make. So it's more sort of a question of policy and how this plays out politically on the floor of town meeting. If you're going to change something that is substantial, such as perhaps like the actual limits within the bylaw, and the planning board based their report and recommendation to town meeting on particular set of numbers that they agreed upon, and they feel that the change that the board makes is so significant as to, change their recommendation, then you're in a difficult position of the planning board maybe, changing its position on the floor of town meeting and not making the recommendation that you thought they were going to make. So for changes that may have that effect of being inconsistent with what the planning board thought they were recommending to town meeting, you might want to consider making those amendments as a motion on the floor of town meeting rather than before it goes into the warrant.
And what is the, I know we always talk about this, and I sometimes get it backwards, is that we can amend to make things less restrictive, but not more restrictive. Is that correct? So if we were actually to decrease the allowable by right square footage or floor area, we would be making it more restrictive.
More restrictive.
So can we do that?
We'll let Katie answer that.
Well, I mean, I think this is a tricky one because you really do have people sort of on both sides of that question as to whether it should be more restrictive or less restrictive. And I think, obviously I can't speak for the planning board, but their position was based on a certain amount of public comment and looking to find a middle ground. So to make it more or less restrictive could change their position on this article this is one of these cases where the more or less restrictive doesn't necessarily play out in terms of the change because of the competing interests on both sides of the question.
So what Katie, I think, is saying is, to some people, it's less restrictive to make them smaller, make the sizes smaller, as opposed to it might be less restrictive to someone to have them made bigger.
Exactly.
So that's where, I think, isn't the litmus test whether people reasonably could have expected to understand what was in front of them when it was advertised?
Well, that's really that's a scope issue with respect to what the planning board's public hearing was, or in the case of a warrant with respect to what was on the warrant versus what actually gets decided at town meeting. So yeah, I mean, if you start making changes that deviate so significantly, there is potentially an argument that it's beyond the scope of the planning board's public hearing, and if it changes so substantially, someone could claim that a new planning board public hearing would have been required because the bylaw is
Right.
no longer what they advertised and considered. I don't think changing the numbers necessarily goes that far, but.
Well, Katie, Bob Weinstein, getting back to Paul's question and being a simple-minded fellow, can you give a straight answer to whether or not something can happen that is it allowable for something to be more restrictive or less restrictive? Because now we've gotten into the weeds of, which I agree with, there are going to be people at town meeting who feel the numbers aren't big enough. And at the same time, there are going to be those that think they're too big.
Yep.
But that still leaves, I think it's Paul's question, if I understood it, which is my question. What are we allowed to do? Can something on town meeting floor be made more or less restrictive?
Well, on town meeting floor, you have the ability to make it more or less restrictive. I think generally when you're talking about whether a change is substantial or not, if it's becoming less restrictive than what was proposed, such that the regulatory requirement is not as stringent as what was originally proposed, then that really does fall within the scope. But to make something more restrictive, just as a general rule, that would be what you would look at.
So if
It
it's,
seems to me, though, that if you're gonna change it such that someone's square footage is less, that's more restrictive to me.
yeah,
And, whether it goes beyond the scope, I guess, would matter as to the extent by which we did that. Like, if we did it by 50 square feet less, it would be different than if we made it by 1,000 square feet less. Is
Well-
that true?
Do we have a bylaws for the seashore so we can see those numbers to see what passed? So we know what the town had to,
You mean the vote?
yeah.
The vote? It's available, I'm sure.
We can probably pull it
It's in the
up.
zoning bylaw.
Yeah.
I can,
It'd be helpful to see those numbers.
So, but I think that what I think it gets back to is that there's no clear-cut answer to that question of what is or isn't more or less restrictive. And I've had this conversation multiple times with Jonathan also, and always walk away thinking, scratching my head, Katie.
Yes.
And so I think the advice I'm hearing from Katie is if you want to make the numbers different, that the better place to do it is town meeting floor as opposed to doing it now. Is that correct, Katie?
I hesitate to do a black or white because, that's my job, to live in the gray. But, but
Thank you.
But certainly, the crux of this bylaw seems to be establishing numbers and thresholds, and so that would be a significant change. And if the planning board were to have an issue with a change, I suspect that it may rise or fall on the selection of what those numbers are. So certainly town meeting floor would give everybody an opportunity to debate that and see what the planning board considered versus what is being proposed by the Board of Selectmen.
That was kind of a yes.
Katie?
A gray yes, sorry, Bob.
Katie, Bob Weinstein again. These are, I hope, not fraught questions. Could we now make the change that my colleague Jan Worthington suggested to the chart? In other words, add a line that has what the figures are for 3/4 of an acre, and also in the commentary, if the number that I'm looking for to inform the public, what is the current average house size in the residential district as part of a commentary to this? Can that be added?
These are comments,
Yeah.
so, right, it doesn't impact the bylaw. What I would recommend would be that we change the chart and, excuse me, since the comment is from the planning board.
We can have our own.
Right.
Okay.
I would think they wouldn't object to changing the chart, but they might object to changing their comment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if my colleagues agreed that that might be useful information, then perhaps we could have something issued from the Board of Selectmen for a comment for town meeting.
And then just kind of see where it goes on town meeting floor, so.
And when you meet on the 23rd, you have an opportunity to vote to recommend this bylaw or not recommend this bylaw. And that would be the point where if you really think the numbers are so big, you may wish to consider not recommending it and then adding a comment as to why, and perhaps in that proposing lower numbers or, you know, so I think that's something to think about.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you
Yes.
for that.
Okay, so here's lot size and acreage in this.
The people, just to keep an eye on time expended here, the people have other comments at this point on this bylaw as it's,
Did you hear what we last said?
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I was trying to find the seashore bylaw.
Let's repeat for.
All right, so
Yeah.
you will vote either to recommend or not recommend the bylaw as it's written to special town meeting. So that's the point at which you might consider voting to not recommend it and then doing an explanatory comment about why you don't recommend it. And if you want different numbers, those could be included in the comment that's added by the Board of Selectmen.
And how much time do we have to do that?
You have to do it on the 23rd, and then I have to post the warrant on the 29th.
People feel strongly that they want to change the numbers?
But that's something we'll decide on the
yeah, because we can't.
23rd. I mean, we could have a conversation, more
Right, but we
conversation
can't
about it,
vote
but
on
we
it.
can't, we can't vote
Can we have
on
a brief conversation about it?
Sure. Whoever would like to.
I mean, I still don't understand why if we have a formula that passed for the seashore, why we're not duplicating that outside of the seashore.
So the formula is a similar formula, it's 300 instead of 200, but the size permitted is the same, but it's permitted on a smaller lot. So that seems to be.
So what,
But
I
why?
think what Kristen is saying is potentially, why don't we apply that formula to the size of lots that are in the
Exactly.
residential?
Proportion.
Yeah, why reinvent the wheel when so much work went into creating this and this passed, this had success in our community,
Because
in our
the
meeting?
seashore is a special place to be preserved, and I think there was enough opposition to going with the smaller sizes in the residential district.
And the lot in the seashore is 3 acres,
Mhm.
that's, mandated.
Mhm.
And our lot size is 3/4 of an acre minimal.
But we're finding that
We're doing
outside the
that.
seashore is also
We're-
just
yeah,
as
we're
fragile
doing
environmentally.
Well, my argument is you can't divide the community that way. The seashore is a geographic construct on the ground.
Yeah.
It's a zoning district, so if you looked at Truro from an airplane,
Yeah.
you wouldn't see those lines. What you would
Right.
see is the upland area that's buildable. And my argument is, we should protect the whole town, not just the seashore. And what I objected to was, and something I left out of this, but I would raise at town meeting, in the seashore, there are only 211 homes spread over, huge acreage. And in the rest of the zoning district, you have the difference between the 200, what did you say, Rand, 12?
Yeah.
Okay, 212 homes, subtract that number from 3,000 residential properties. And
4,000 actually.
No,
Okay.
it's 3320.
33.
But anyway, you get a big number, that's my point. And if you want to, if you want,
Sorry.
you can laugh at my math skills.
No,
No,
okay.
I'm laughing at Paul and I.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just think this is contradictory of what its stated purpose is. You either protect something in its entirety, because you're talking, the argument which I thought was ludicrous in the seashore was, and I always say, every residence in the seashore has one well and one septic system. It's private property, and there are very few homes. Here, we're talking about the whole town. So you've got lots of septic systems, absent Beach Point, which has town water, a few residences that are not condos, and you have the rest of the community that's septic systems and wells. So let's protect everything. That's my feeling. I have no idea what the number is, by the way. And I do think that, you know, the intelligent comments from all of them, from my colleagues, make the point. There are going to be people there who don't like this because they want a bigger house, and then there are going to be people there who think it's too much. And I'm willing to let town meeting, as we have to. Town meetings, they decide what it is. But I just think they should be playing with broad information.
We can get that information. I think maybe last on this topic before we move on.
I have something to say
Okay.
too.
I think it's, I think
You
it's,
thought you could get away with you not saying anything?
I think it's a compromise. I think this bylaw ended up being a compromise with trying to satisfy the people that wanted less size and the people that wanted no restriction.
Who
And I
spoke
think
very loudly and very aggressively. The
Trust
people
me,
who
I know.
wanted loud,
No.
bigger,
Okay.
right?
And I think
Yeah,
that
that was like a sliding scale is what
Yeah.
one individual wanted, but we didn't really get, we asked for, you know, some sort of model to go off of that we could talk about, but we never really got any.
In other words, the
feedback.
person complained but never gave an alternative, so.
Right.
But this
And
is
there
for
was-
new builds, right? I mean, everybody who has an existing home is grandfathered.
I think it applies to if you want to make a change to your property
Yeah.
as well, correct?
Yes, well, you would have to go through a special permit
Yeah.
process.
Special permit.
Yeah.
Because it would
So it's
be,
for anything.
Yeah.
And I think one of the other big questions is, well, what if you wanted to finish your basement? How does that count? But anyway, your turn.
That'll come up.
Yeah, but we should know, we should have an
Right.
answer for that.
Well, it doesn't include basements and attics.
right, that's right, unfinished
The
basement,
unfinished
Unfinished
basement.
is preferred.
yeah,
So if you
for
finish
that,
it,
right.
right.
And again, that-
Paul?
So, first of all, I know a lot of work went into this, both by
Mhm.
staff and by
Mhm.
the planning board and by One Truro. So I want to acknowledge that and thank them for the hard work, because this is not an easy thing to do. And the challenge here, though, is if you craft a bylaw that tries to make everyone happy, does it end up doing what the intention of the bylaw is? And I'm concerned that the compromises here may have pushed this to a realm where it's really not doing what we want, which is to control the character and, as you said, the look of Truro in a sense. And, you know, as Bob said, you could have a 10,000 square foot home in the seashore, nobody would see it. Or a 5,000 square foot home in the seashore, or what the maximum size of this is. But if you're in the residential district, everyone sees it. And so in some way, it says to me that this needs to be actually more restrictive. Because, and this may be a bad analogy, but it's like if you set a speed limit of 150 miles per hour, most people aren't going to drive to 150 miles an hour, but they can. And so, you know, I would err on actually making this more restrictive. Then the question is this better than nothing?
Mhm.
Like, is this actually gonna maybe prevent 5 mega mansions?
Because right now, all we have is a 25-foot setback.
So, you know, then
And
that's
height
the other
restriction.
question. Do we not tinker with it and hope that it passes? Because they have done a lot of outreach to try to generate consensus and support for this. And so is this better than nothing? But I don't think that it does as much as it can. That's my point of view.
And if the past is any indicator, all of those questions will come up
Yeah.
on the town meeting floor. So I think it's more like, where are we together about it by the time we get there?
Yeah.
Because those will be the questions, and those will be, and there'll be, you know, each side will present, so just what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So,
And
I mean, I agree with you.
I am concerned that, you know, we've all seen this sitting up there or being a participant in a town meeting on the floor, particularly with the zoning bylaws, if someone is confused, and that's what I'm concerned about this. It is a little confusing. It's not super clear.
Yeah.
And if someone gets up on the floor and starts saying, this is confusing to me, it usually torpedoes it.
Yeah.
And because you need 2/3.
Yeah.
And so I am concerned just in general, and again, this is not a criticism of the quality and the amount of work done by the planning board, but it's not super clear.
We had actually gotten some comments during the public hearing about making it more simple and just removing the special permit section and just having the one as of right section with the size limitation, just because people were concerned as to your point that it was kind of confusing, but the board felt that having a special permit section would allow people to then, you know, who do want the bigger houses to apply, and they still have to go through the zoning board, but, you know, at least they have the option of getting a bigger house. So that, again, it was a compromise, but your point is, yeah, it was definitely voiced at the public hearing.
Yeah.
So what are methods to make it less confusing?
Well, I don't think we can do anything at this point.
No, we can't.
I mean, I think Jan's change to the table is going to be very helpful.
That can be done, that's in the comment section. That will help make it a little less confusing. And then I think that we can revisit this. I think on the 23rd, I only have the firefighter pinning for the 3 new firefighters at the beginning of the meeting. Yes, there will be cake. And I don't think I think there's a public hearing for utility work that should be very brief, and then it'll just be the warrant articles.
And I think something not to lose sight of, we can't do anything right now, but one of the really important things that Paul just pointed out was, if we do nothing, then what are we looking at? In other words, if this doesn't pass in some iteration, that's really important to pay attention to, as any, you know, bylaws are regulatory by their nature, so whatever it pertains to. The question is the document in front of town meeting, is it better to have that document in its form, Paul, if I understood what you were getting at, as opposed to having nothing? Because the nothing is, with regard to house sizes, we've already seen what can happen. The only good news, and I'd be less alarmist, is it takes a while. In other words, we're not going to get in the next 2 years, you know, 20 houses that are all 8,000 square feet or bigger. But you're right, could happen. So I think what you mentioned, people should pay attention to.
Well, it's like the condo conversion. It doesn't pass until it's written in a way that everybody can agree on, and then it eventually happens. But if we are a body who sound potentially like we don't accept it as written right now, and we are not recommending it, but people do look to our recommendations as guides on how to vote in their busy lives, how can we articulate that not only do we support this, but we want these numbers to be more regulatory, to be in line with the essence of the rule in the first place? So how do we communicate that to the public if we are potentially unanimously not recommending it as written?
In a comment that is prepared by the Board of Selectmen to go in the warrant.
Okay.
So I think it sounds like we're ready to move on to the next.
Well, I just want to give an example, I'm sorry, is that, you know, there are some larger parcels of land still available in Truro, not many. But if someone came in with a subdivision plan and they had the subdivision, each had 3/4 acre lots, it could be a subdivision of nearly 5,000 square foot
houses.
homes. And
And they
We
could do
really
that right
need more
now.
of.
they could do more.
They could do it right now and more.
Yeah.
The limiting factor will be bedrooms and
Bedrooms.
septic and
Yeah.
water.
Right.
That's the limiting factor, because there's less separation on a 3/4 acre of the two. So that is the limiting factor here.
Big rec rooms and kitchens.
And there is an
Pool
example,
houses.
Elevator.
there's an example of what Paul is talking about. If you drive into Provincetown on the left on the water, there's a
Mhm.
subdivision there, and
Yeah.
all those houses
Oh,
are
yeah.
4,000 square
So
feet plus.
we have Katie till 4 o'clock, right, Katie?
So let's move on.
Should we start by asking Katie to summarize
Yeah, that might be helpful.
the marijuana bylaw?
Yep.
Did you hear that, Katie?
Yes, I'm right here.
Sorry, I surprised you, I know.
No, you didn't. I'm here, I'm ready to go. So you wanted to sort of summarize what the planning board came up with?
Yes.
All right, so as you're probably aware, many communities are in a similar position with respect to trying to figure out how to best regulate the commercial use of marijuana. This bylaw started as sort of a template version that mirrored what was happening in many other communities, and through the planning board process went through some substantial revision with a lot of input from the group of craft marijuana cultivators in the town who had who really wanted to see the farming community in Truro be able to participate in this commercial endeavor. And there was a lot of balancing of interests versus protection of the community. So the bylaw basically includes a general purpose section. The definitions that are in the bylaw are taking almost all of them come from the state regulations. So we're not reinventing the wheel here. There are a few definitions that are included in here that were things that were specifically referenced in the bylaw. That were not regulatory. So, for example, I think we included definition of parcel.
Yeah. K.
Commission, but everything else is really just a regulatory definition. So then there was a lot of discussion around the use table and where all of these various uses should be allowed to locate. The commercial marijuana industry is going to have a number of use categories that are licensed on the state level, and we, for the most part, mirrored those same license categories in the bylaw so that you're looking at the same type of uses across the board. The uses that are going to be regulated are the cultivation of marijuana, manufacturing, product manufacturing, independent testing laboratory, research facility, marijuana transporter, retail business. And now there are a few other categories in here that are sort of subsets of those uses. So a medical marijuana treatment center and a medical marijuana dispensary. Those are similar types of uses, but the product that they cultivate and sell is for medical purposes. And then there are these other categories, the marijuana microbusiness and the marijuana craft cooperative. And those are really both subsets of marijuana cultivation and marijuana product manufacturing, but they follow a particular ownership structure. And in order to qualify for a state license in each of those categories, you have to meet certain requirements on the state level. So the bylaw looks to include a number of these uses in the residential districts because of their similarity to agricultural uses, which is where some of these farms are located and operating. So, for example, we're allowing marijuana cultivation, medical marijuana treatment center, cultivation only, marijuana microbusiness, and a marijuana craft cooperative, all within the residential district. You'll note at the bottom of the use table, which is on the third page of this bylaw, that there are some footnotes that apply to those residential uses. So for example, the total number of parcels allowed to be used by a craft marijuana cooperative in the residential district would be limited to 6. And then there's a second footnote which applies to all of the cultivation uses in the residential district and allows there to be a total canopy limit, as well as an initial canopy limit. So canopy is basically the amount of mature plants you have for these facilities. And it would start initially at a 10,000 square foot canopy in the residential district with the ability to increase to a tier 6 production level. So then other than the cultivation in the residential district, there's also some cultivation allowed in the NT6A, which has some other farming things. Other uses that would be allowed in that district include the product manufacturing, the testing laboratory, the research facilities. The majority of the uses would be allowed by special permit in the Route 6 district. And then the table also includes a limitation on the total number of establishments. And this is something that the law allows you to do, is to put in place limitations. And so as a conservative sort of rollout start to this business within Truro, the planning board came to a limit of 1 of each type of establishment, with the exception of marijuana retailer, in which case there would be 2 permits allowed, and that's basically as a result of a state law provision which requires certain limitations. If you go below them, then you have to follow an additional permitting process. So this puts it at a reasonable level that doesn't require the town to also go to a ballot question to allow that number. The rest of the bylaw pertains to the limitations and regulations that would apply to all of these types of establishments. The planning board went through all of these in a lot of detail. But a lot of these mirror requirements that are in other communities, but there are some very specific requirements that are imposed in this bylaw with respect to the cultivation facilities. And those are in section 100.8. And a lot of these provisions are specifically directed at protecting the residential district from any impacts that might result from allowing growing in that area. We've also imposed special permit and site plan review criteria. One big area of debate that was eventually settled was who should be the permit granting authority. And what has been decided by the planning board was that this would be a split review between the zoning board of appeals and the planning board, with the planning board first conducting a site plan review and approval process, followed by the applicant requiring a special permit from the zoning board of appeals. So the bylaw basically incorporates most of the review criteria that already exist in the bylaw for commercial uses. And with respect to the cultivation of marijuana, it also incorporates the site plan review, some of the site plan review criteria that would be appropriate for residential projects as well, to make sure that it is protecting to the maximum extent possible of residential properties. And other than walking through everything specific, I think that's just the general overview, and I'm certainly happy to answer any questions.
I have a question, just, I'm pretending I'm in the audience. It's Jan, Katie. So the size, so if you live in a residential neighborhood on a three-quarter acre lot, and you have a neighbor that abuts you with an open, a house with land in the back of it, what's the size of a building that can be put up there for marijuana cultivation?
So one of the requirements that we put in here had to do with the size of buildings, and I'm just gonna try and find that.
It's the 100.6J.
Yeah, I had questions about that one.
5,000 square feet
It's
on a
5,000.
2-acre lot, right?
Yeah. So there was an effort to basically follow the house size bylaw, generally speaking, with respect to the amount of additional buildings that could be put on a property. However, where there was an exemption included in here if you were growing in a greenhouse. So the greenhouse limitation in the residential zoning district is, I believe we limited it to 25% lot coverage.
So what's that mean if I live in, I just, what does that mean in terms of the size of a building and/or a greenhouse on a 3/4 acre lot or an acre lot in a neighborhood?
Yeah, those are gonna be questions
Yeah.
that get asked.
Yeah.
So I was looking at this section J, and so the calculation of the greenhouse, 25%, is that after deducting for the size of other buildings, or is it of the total square footage of the lot inclusive of other buildings already on the lot?
So the 25% lot coverage is for the cultivation operation itself. So you're going to exclude whatever other buildings you already have on the property.
But it's not clear. That's not clear to me. Because it says marijuana cultivation in the residential district shall not exceed 24% of the parcel's gross square footage. If it's gross square footage, that would be inclusive of existing dwellings.
Are you on J?
Now I'm on back on
This
100.8.
was the point we were talking
Yeah,
about
so there's-
before, we had
there's-
some conflict in here.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We wanted to- yeah.
Go ahead, Jess. Did you
Oh,
wanna-
no, I was just gonna say, this is what we were talking about having those two conflicting sections and then the footnote 2.
This was a part of the process that once we kind of got through and reviewed everything and we did our sort of final legal review, we noted that there were potentially some inconsistencies. So the three areas of the bylaw that regulate the amount of lot coverage are number one, this footnote 2. So the footnote 2 applies specifically to anybody who's growing in a residential district. And it starts by limiting the total amount of canopy to 10,000 square feet or less. And then it allows you to go up with special permit review,
To 50,000.
50,000 square feet.
Bless you.
So a
And
3/4
then
acre
the
lot,
cultivation is limited to parcels 1.5 acres or more. So that's your first set of regulations that applies across all cultivation within in the residential district. Then you have a provision in
106J.
J. And this is the one where we talk about the greenhouses. So to encourage the use of greenhouses, basically J imposes a total floor area of all enclosed buildings for marijuana establishments in the residential and NT6 district. And if you're talking about structures other than greenhouses, then you have this limitation measured from the exterior faces of the exterior walls, 5,000 square feet on a 2-acre lot, plus 500 square feet for each additional continuous acre of land, minus 500 square feet for each continuous acre less than 2 acres, as the case may be.
okay,
So-
wait, I'm sorry, Katie, to interrupt, but with time and everything, can you answer the question and do the math for us to give us an idea for this? Because this is just way too confusing. for me, and I'm sure it is for a lot of people. I just want to get a sense of, when we're asked, what can be built next to me in my neighborhood, a simple way of answering that.
Sure.
Okay.
So if you're on 2 acres,
Yeah,
it's 5,000 square feet. For every additional acre, you can add 500 square feet to that. And then you're going to prorate that if you have a proportion of an acre.
So, but that's excluding greenhouses. Am I hearing that?
Greenhouses are excluded from that calculation. And this was something the planning board addressed. And there was a debate as to whether or not this limitation should apply to greenhouses or it should just apply to other types of accessory growing structures. And the concern in that case was metal buildings, storage containers, movable structures, the things that people were concerned might be more of an eyesore. And so there was a question, should greenhouses be included in this calculation limit or should they be excluded? And the planning board ultimately decided that greenhouses had an appearance more agricultural in nature and that they would be less offensive in terms of their visual impact. And so they decided to exclude from that calculation greenhouses. So now, there is a limitation, an additional limitation imposed in 100.8, which says marijuana cultivation in the residential district shall not exceed 25% of the parcel's gross square footage. And that provision, that specific provision, does not is not specific to the greenhouses. It's inclusive of all growing activities. And the idea behind that section was that even though you're going to have a limitation on the types of sort of metal or movable structures, that you're going to have an overall cap of no more than 25% of the parcel being covered with any type of building.
And Katie, Bob Weinstein, I think it's helpful to focus on a couple of things.
Can I follow up
Sure.
on that though? Because I still haven't got my question answered, which is, so is the 25% of the gross area of the lot? So that's inclusive. So say you had you have a 2 acre, 5,000, you had 5,000 square feet of building on 2 acres. Does that deduct 5,000 square feet from the calculation of 25%? Or is the calculation of 25% still on 2 acres? You see what I'm getting?
25% is with respect to your 2 acres total.
So it doesn't account for existing structures that are already on the property?
That was the discussion of the planning board, yes.
Okay. I just wanted that clarification, to
And
make
could
sure
I
I'm
just-
understanding
So
it
they
correctly.
can't grow on 3/4 acre, Jan.
they can't.
No, it's 1.5.
Okay, and just to, and then I'll be quiet. Yeah, okay, so you've got the greenhouse there. Do the requirements for safety, lighting, fencing, et cetera, apply to the greenhouses and as well as the buildings? Is there any differentiation between the two in terms of what's required around them?
The state has that.
Yes, so there are very strict state regulations that apply to these types of establishments, and anybody who's growing, whether it is in a greenhouse or any type of structure, or whether they're going to do an outdoor grow, it has to meet the state requirements, which include lighting, fencing, if it's outdoor, security cameras, backup systems. It's in many instances, these security requirements exceed that of, banks or police stations or any other.
Right, but I'm just saying the idea that it's visually somehow nicer to have a greenhouse than a, brick building or a aluminum building or a metal building, it's still going to have outside of that the same requirements of fencing, lighting, and security. Right?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
So, Kate,
Can I get back to my,
I'd be happy to share this part of the
No,
discussion with you.
I got that. Thanks.
Katie, I think it's important that in these discussions in the residential district to refer to the footnote 2, because the most important part of this conversation, which is being left out, we're talking about 2 acres here, 3/4 of an acre there. The last sentence reads, cultivation in the residential district is limited to parcels of 1.5 acres or more. So if then you fast forward, keeping that in mind, to 100.8E, where it says, the last sentence reads, marijuana cultivation in the residential district shall not exceed 25% of the parcel's gross square footage. Well, what the arithmetic dictates there is an acre and a half is 65,340 square feet. 25% of that is 16,225 square feet. And I did a calculation, if I understood the building correctly, you're allowing someone with an acre and a half of land to cover about 1/3 of that property with canopy plus whatever structures you have. I'm not saying whether that's
Planning
good.
board's allowing it.
Yeah, the planning board's allowing it. I'm not saying whether that's good or bad, I just want people to understand.
Well, that's what I was trying to get at, was the total coverage.
Well, the total, that's what
On
it
the-
says, right?
With
That's what the
greenhouse,
numbers
right.
are.
Yeah.
So if you add the whatever it was, you have allowable in the section I just read, not to exceed 25%. So let's say you have 25% of the acre and a half. That's 16,325 square feet. That's,
But you wouldn't be able to, in the first
Yeah,
years,
the
you wouldn't
tier
be able
doesn't
to
allow
have
them to do
10,000
that. It's
total
10. Can you
canopy.
correct me? The tier that you're allowing people to enter is a cap of tier 2, which is 10,000 square feet, which means the entire craft cooperative would have only 10,000 square feet that they are splitting for use. Is that true?
That's right. So the way that the craft cooperative works is that they get a cap from the state, an overall cap in their canopy of 100,000 square feet, and they can distribute that however they choose among multiple locations. But what the bylaw does is it starts out very small at 10,000 square feet, and then it allows them to increase. But it's never going to go all the way up to that 100,000 square feet, because the maximum level is that the bylaw allows within the residential district is the tier 6 production level.
Which is how many square feet?
50,000.
40 to 50.
50,000 square feet,
Right.
distributed among all the growers.
Katie, Bob again, getting back to fundamentals in section 100.2 definitions. I'm looking at paragraph G, and I find myself in Alice in Wonderland here. I'm going to read this. Marijuana retailer shall mean an entity licensed to purchase and transport cannabis or marijuana product from marijuana establishments and to sell or otherwise transfer this product to marijuana establishments and to consumers. Retailers are prohibited from delivering cannabis or marijuana products to consumers and from offering, it goes on. Well, those two things contradict each other. You can't
Well,
have...
I can explain that, and again, this is a state law definition that we've just incorporated into the
I know where
bylaw.
it comes from, it doesn't make any sense.
So the distinction that is important here is the distinction between transportation and delivery. So as of right now, the state has not put in place any regulations for delivery direct to consumers. You can't, order online and have someone drop it off at your house. But the regulations do allow for the transportation of marijuana from one location to another. So in here where it talks about their license to purchase and transport, that means basically you can buy your marijuana from a cultivator or a product manufacturer. You can drive your truck there, you can pick it up. It's all going to be very regulated, licensed transportation process that applies to this. You can take it to your establishment, you can sell it to consumers, but you are prohibited from delivering it to consumers directly in a off-site delivery type of operation.
So retailers, the sentence that I read, retailers are prohibited from delivering cannabis or marijuana products to consumers,
Right.
Right.
correct?
That's your your direct-to-consumer delivery service. That's what's prohibited.
And then my next question is in J, under the same section. Micro business means a co-located marijuana establishment. What is that?
Means you're growing and producing.
Yes. So a micro business, again, is a certain type of state license category, and it's a very small scale marijuana cultivator, and it can also have a product manufacturing component. But there are strict limits on how much you can grow and how much you can manufacture. So it's 5,000 square foot cap on the canopy, and you can have delivered, or you can have purchased and brought in from off-site no more than 2,000 pounds of marijuana annually for your product manufacturing. But you can have both parts of that enterprise in a single location under a single license. Otherwise, if you're a marijuana product manufacturer and a marijuana cultivator, you're going to have to, on a larger scale, you're going to have to get 2 separate licenses from the state for each part of that operation.
Thank you. I have one more question. This is on the table, and again, I'm focusing on the next to last, marijuana micro businesses. You may have explained this already, and I'm not sure I caught the explanation, but micro businesses, as you just said, are small cultivators apart from something like the cooperative, correct?
Yes.
They are limited to operating on 1.5 acres, correct? In the residential district.
Well, so the specific footnote 2 is not applicable to marijuana microbusiness, and the reason that it was not included on microbusiness is because it already has a cap of 5,000 square feet.
In tier 1,
so
micro
Tier 1.
businesses
No,
cannot
I
have
know
more
that,
than tier
but
1.
what I'm getting at is someone owns 1.5 acres in a residential area, is not part of the cooperative and wants to have a micro business. Shouldn't they be allowed to? And why was the decision to only permit 1?
Well, I think the decision by the planning board was to, across the board, with the exception of marijuana retailer, because of a provision in the state law, limit everything to 1 license as an initial sort of rollout of this bylaw. But a marijuana microbusiness, in fact, does not currently have a limit on the acreage on which you could conduct that business. The 1.5 acres in that footnote 2 is applicable to marijuana cultivator as a separate license type, medical marijuana cultivation, and marijuana craft cooperative. The microbusiness doesn't have that footnote 2 attached to it.
Yeah, my handwritten note was there, what about micro business? And I'm just concerned that, are we going somewhere where we're prohibiting people who meet the minimum lot size? And we live in a state that has legalized this for cultivation. If someone asks that question, I think the planning board has to be prepared for an answer that makes sense, because in this environment, what I think you're encouraging is the production of illegal marijuana. I own 4 acres. I could grow, and I don't want to encourage that.
You're in the seashore, you probably.
Well, that's since Rayanne, you brought it up. Town council has not answered the question, can I, in the seashore, that's a zoning, no, wait a minute.
It's
a zoning district, hear me,
Okay.
hear me out. There is a federal law which makes marijuana illegal, that hasn't changed. My property is governed by the private property laws of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, not the federal government. My property is private property. It's not federal property. And what I want an answer, and I haven't gotten one, I'm married to an attorney, I have more attorneys than my family. No one has answered the question to my satisfaction. Am I allowed to, by right, on a piece of private property? Maybe when I get out on a road that's owned by the federal government in the seashore, I'm in trouble. But my property is private property. My zoning bylaws apply to private property, and those are promulgated by the town of Truro, not by the federal government. So I don't have an answer. And I see in the seashore, everything's prohibited. I'm not asking for it to be made permissible now, but that's a question some of my neighbors might ask, why can't we grow it? And it has nothing to do with the fact that the seashore is federal. It is federal. All of the improved properties are private property, and I underline the private. End of story.
So we have 35 minutes left.
So I have
I have another, go ahead. I
Okay.
have one word after you.
two things quickly. One is, I think I understand the micro business now, but could someone say they were part of a craft cooperative, and can they also have a micro business license?
No, I don't think so.
Let's let our attorney answer.
So that's an interesting question.
I'm just blurting out here. Sorry,
If
Katie.
you qualified on the state level to get a license in both those categories and met the bylaw requirements, I don't think that there is a specific impediment to one individual holding both types of licenses. The only restriction on that, which I would have to check, is whether or not the state regulations have some preclusive language if you're part of a craft cooperative, if you can own a license in another category. But I don't recall off the top of my head that there is such a limitation. Even within the other categories, like for example, a marijuana cultivator, which is a location-specific license on the state level, you could have up to 3 licenses at 3 different locations as an individual. So there's not immediately a preclusive limitation on people holding more than one license in more than one category.
So you could be part of a cooperative then, and then also have another plot that you could do, you could become a micro business.
Right, and then on the local level, I mean, those entities would, if you're doing craft cultivation as a use and micro business as a use, you're going to have to get each of those separately permitted, and you're going to have to meet the requirements of the bylaw with respect to the amount of land that you're using for those.
For each one.
Each one, yeah.
The regs for craft cooperative case say members of a cooperative shall not have a controlling interest in any other marijuana establishment.
Oh, okay.
Controlling interest, no.
So just one last
But you
thing,
can have a
and then I'll let my colleague, Ms. Worthington. Thank you, Katie. So under 100.6A, I'm curious as to why, because the grades K through 12 excludes preschools, nursery schools, and licensed daycare. So I'm curious as to why we wouldn't include those, because it's really getting at the same thing. Basically, we want kids 0 to 18
To stay away from
So I just wondered if there was any conversation about that, and can we put that in?
Yes, I mean, that is certainly something you can put in. The language that is in here right now basically mirrors what the state buffer requirement is under state law. And I think originally there were proposals to have an increased buffer around other types of sensitive land use, and it was decided that that was potentially overly restrictive and that they would just use the state buffer. And the state buffer does not include preschool, which is why it's not in here, but many communities have included things like preschools or public playgrounds or things like that as part of their buffer zones, and those buffers have been approved by the Attorney General in the review of these types of bylaws. You just want to make sure they're not so restrictive in the types of land uses that you're including in that buffer that you basically make it impossible for anyone to find a place to locate.
Right. And then what about wellhead protection zones?
Whether or not those should be included as part of the buffer.
Right, and what would happen if I don't know if any of the farms are within the wellhead protection zone, but particularly if they're going to be fertilizers used.
Yeah, Paul's referring to the public water supply for Provincetown that's located in Truro. There's, I think, 3 sites. And so there is a buffer zone around the wellhead that restricts what can be done.
So if there's not already a restriction that would apply to these types of of agricultural uses. There might already be something in the wellhead protection bylaw which would be applicable. You could include those in this bylaw as an additional buffer or protection. I don't see an issue with addressing that. I will note that most of these, and there may be some outdoor growing, certainly amongst the craft cooperative, I think there was some discussion of that, but a lot of this is going to be very highly controlled indoor cultivation because of the strict testing requirements that apply to these types of plants and the products and the pesticides and what gets absorbed by these plants.
So this doesn't have to go to Conservation Commission for review or Health Board for review, is that correct?
Well, I mean, if this is being proposed on bylaws or otherwise triggered, then yes, I mean, there's additional review that might have to happen. I don't believe the Board of Health right now does not, to my knowledge, have any marijuana-specific rules and regulations in place. Some communities have adopted some oversight and given the Board of Health a role in reviewing and inspecting, particularly the product manufacturing portion of this, where there might be edibles or food products being created. But so, I mean, the zoning bylaw doesn't preclude other review if it falls within the regulatory scope of another board or commission.
So,
Go ahead.
oh, I'm sorry, Jan. So if, for example, an application for site plan came in, the standard procedure is to send it out to fire, police, health and conservation. And so if the conservation agent saw something in the location that triggered conservation review, they'd be entitled to do that?
Yes, and even if it didn't trigger conservation review, I mean, we've incorporated all of the review and submittal requirements of the existing special permit and site plan requirements of the bylaw. So if that's the general procedure for these types of permits to go out for that kind of review and comment, and the Board of Health or the Conservation Commission had particular concerns that they wanted to raise with respect to the permitting process, they certainly have the ability to make those concerns known to the Planning Board and ZBA through this process.
Katie's Jan, I just have a question, and I don't know whether it's addressed in the state bylaws or in this. Is there some place that vehicles, trucks, noise from trucks, beeping backups, you know, running equipment, et cetera, is addressed in a residential area?
So there's a traffic study and circulation plan that's required. And then all of the special permit and site plan review requirements that already exist in the bylaw are applicable. And then both the zoning board and the planning board have the ability to condition these uses in any way that they see fit. So if you end up with an establishment that looks like it's going to generate significant traffic or have trucks coming or going, and that could be addressed through the permitting process in order to condition it appropriately.
Katie, could we follow up on Jan's, but it seems to me that it's only required of marijuana retailers or medical marijuana treatment centers, and that the planning board can waive the traffic study for all other license categories. At least that's the way I read it, the traffic study and circulation plan.
Right, I believe that the planning board's intent was to build a little bit of flexibility in here because obviously this bylaw applies to a wide spectrum of uses, and so a small scale micro business that has 5,000 square feet of canopy is going to have a different traffic impact than a retail establishment that may be getting lots of cars coming and going. On the other hand, if you end up somehow with a fairly large scale commercial cultivator on a single location, then there are other concerns addressed. So the idea was that here are the standards and things that we can look at, but if it's very clear on the face of an application that some of this is not applicable, we want to give the board the ability to waive requirements and not make this an onerous process where it's not needed to be.
Okay,
Thank
and
you.
Katie, just to follow up on that, I have one more question about that. In your experience or in your knowledge of other communities where this has gone on, has there been any issues with, you know, in Truro, for instance, there's always been restrictions on home businesses for contractors or lobstermen, or, you know, there's all kinds of issues around what you can do as a business in a residential area. So has that come up in terms of allowing this kind of business versus other businesses in a community?
Did it come up in the context of this bylaw or in other communities?
In other communities, I mean, just wondering if it's come up, if you have any insight about that.
I know that some communities have specifically included language that says, notwithstanding anything in this bylaw, no marijuana establishment shall be permitted to operate as a home occupation, which is basically to address the issue of people perhaps trying to find a way to do this, in their homes in the residential zoning district. The concern with the balancing of the interests of the craft cooperative with the town, certainly a lot of these farms do have residential dwellings on the same lots in which they're looking to do these cultivations and processing operations, and there was definitely some concern expressed about limiting it too much to the point where somebody wouldn't be able to do this as part of a combined residential agricultural property. So we don't have any language in there in this bylaw that addresses the home occupation point of this, and we try to address the regulations specific to the impact as opposed to just a blanket prohibition.
Okay, so legally though, if somebody were to say, well, if they can do this, why can't I have my trucking, trash business in my backyard? What would we say as a town?
The response is that if the town decides to vote this bylaw, then they've made a policy decision as a town that these types of uses, this marijuana cultivation and manufacturing, is a use that is okay to have operate within a residential zoning district, and the town has not made a similar policy call with respect to trucking operations or other commercial ventures.
And you're only allowed 6 plants in your home, so.
Amend the bylaw to allow that in the residential district, then it would be allowed. But the reason it would be allowed in this case is because the town has adopted very specific zoning that calls this out as a use which is permitted in that district.
Okay, thanks.
So if there's say someone already has a residential structure, and then can they do processing and manufacturing in the residential structure?
So they would have to meet the state requirements in order to do that in the residential structure, but certainly it was contemplated by the planning board that if they were able to meet the state requirements for the food handling and the processing and the security that would be attendant to doing those types of uses in their home, that they should not be precluded from being able to do that.
Okay, thank you.
May I ask a question? Under 100.5D, can you please explain standalone structures?
100.5D.
Yep, marijuana retailers shall be located in standalone structures.
Yeah, and I understand that there's potentially some concern about a limitation of this nature. The idea behind locating marijuana retailers in a standalone structure primarily comes from a security standpoint, and the idea being that these are predominantly all cash businesses, and that they're just easier to secure and to monitor if they're in a standalone structure. So some communities have adopted these types of requirements. I know the planning board discussed removing it and decided ultimately to leave it, but it certainly does potentially pose some significant limitations on the types of existing structures that may be able to house these types of uses.
And this won't always be a cash-only business. there will eventually, I mean, there's talks in Congress about talking about trying to find ways to bank this.
Yeah, and actually there are a couple of ways around that. I know that there are some debit companies that people can purchase using debit cards that are not necessarily strictly affiliated with banks that are federally insured, so that there is the ability to purchase this through debit programs.
Like ones in
right now.
Boston, and Netta, Sierra Naturals, and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Katie, I have one question. It's Maureen here. Are we unique in the Commonwealth of dealing with the model of craft cooperatives in residential areas? In a residential area?
There have not been a lot of craft cooperative applications to the Cannabis Control Commission at this point in time. Most communities don't have an organized craft cooperative that are, looking at these issues and bringing them to the forefront. So it hasn't really been. So yes, in some ways you are unique in that the craft cooperative in this particular case has brought forward a lot of issues with respect to the regulations and how it would impact their use, because they are located in a residential district and they are, legacy farms for the most part.
Thank you.
Irving, Massachusetts is going through this. They have growers trying to be in the residential district, because similar to our area, they have so many farms that already exist where people are trying to break into the industry, and they also have low population like we do. So they're trying to find
they're
ways
kind
to
of
pay their
similar.
bills, yeah. So Irving.
Do any of my colleagues have other questions? Katie, you are only available for another 15 minutes or so, is that correct?
I can stay till 4:30 if there's more questions.
Well, I just wanted to make sure that people took the opportunity of your presence to, if there are more questions.
We do have to be out of this room by 5, and we have a regular meeting we have to do
Right.
as well, so we need to be mindful. I want to, two things if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
I'm still a little bit confused about the commercial businesses, the home businesses. So, did you say, do we allow home businesses at this point? Home occupation will not change, include carpenters, plumbers, electricians, similar tradesmen, home and yard maintenance.
What does that say? And where is that?
Is that from our use table? Or
No,
zoning?
it's by definition. It's in definition. So we do allow it with any other activity with a special permit. So we already allow it.
Allow what?
Home occupation. It's
We
not in
don't-
there, it's in.
Yeah, but we
It's in
don't
the zoning
allow,
bylaw.
we may allow home occupation, but we don't allow people to have a
Trucking
construction
company.
business or we don't allow for
The
anything,
storage of,
Heavy
heavy
equipment.
equipment in and out of the neighborhood, we don't allow for that.
so if that's already in place, Katie, does anything in this bylaw, and I know you answered it, but I don't think I followed the answer, so I apologize.
No worries.
Does anything in this bylaw then create the opportunity for that to occur in a residential neighborhood?
Because it's a precedent.
Yes, oh, I will answer for the attorney.
So
Sorry, Katie.
The only thing that's being allowed in the residential district under this zoning bylaw is cultivation. And in the case of the craft cooperative and the micro business, potentially some product manufacturing. I think, so the only issue is there going to be product manufacturing that might take place within a residential dwelling? And then certainly, I suspect there's some aspect of the bookkeeping and just sort of the management of the business that would potentially take place in a residential dwelling. Anything that would take place under this bylaw is not opening up the door for other people to do home occupations that wouldn't otherwise be permitted.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
That's what I think we needed to hear you say. So, and I thought I heard you say that, but I wanted to be sure. Did I interrupt? Did you have more? I'm sorry.
Oh, that's it, yep.
And then I know there's some inconsistency between lot coverage and building size that needs to be cleaned up. And so how would you suggest we do that? Would we ask you and Jess to work on whatever it is that needs to clean it up and make them consistent and get that to us for our next meeting? Is that what makes sense? Or should it be
And
done?
then we'd amend it?
Or should it be done from the floor? But we need to get that cleaned up.
Yeah, no, I think Jess and I can do that, and we can make that change without a formal amendment.
Oh,
right?
okay.
Because it's just cleaning up. I mean, the real issue here is that you have marijuana cultivation that is taking place in the residential zoning district, but then you also have marijuana cultivation that's taking place in non-residential zoning districts. And there's, in section 10, I think it's 108,
100.8?
yes, 100.8 subsection E, this was the area where Jess and I had raised an issue with respect to consistency, and I had proposed a change in E to make it specific to marijuana cultivation that's taking place not in the residential district, because we already had footnote 2 and the subsection 106.J that applied to the residential cultivation.
Okay.
So it was, the concern was that we had these cultivation restrictions, and there was inconsistencies between what was happening in the residential district and then the restrictions that were going to apply to non-residential.
All right, so why don't you go ahead and do that and get that to me for
Okay.
inclusion in the warrant and on our town website.
Now, what is the
Okay.
plan for us here, just so I'm clear about this?
Well, the plan is, obviously, you're not going to vote on anything tonight, but I think you may want to decide whether you're going to recommend or not recommend. If you're not going to recommend, then you might want to think about what it is you might want to see changed that you'd be more comfortable with, that could go to a motion on the floor of town meeting, which is probably the cleanest way to do it.
Katie, while you're still here, because this may come up, at least for me, in the deliberation of this, is there a reason, or could you just tell us a little bit about how the idea of the overlay districts did not work in terms of the existing farms in residential areas versus opening it up to all residential areas?
Yes, so just really briefly, the concept of an overlay district is that you leave all of your existing zoning districts intact, and you just overlay, for example, a marijuana cultivation district, which selects specific parcels and puts them together as basically an overlays that on top of existing zoning. So you have the flexibility to sort of surgically pick and choose the land area in the town that would be appropriate for the uses without opening up an entire zoning district. I had discussed with Brianne and some members of the planning board the possibility that an overlay district that applies specifically to existing or legacy farms might be an appropriate way to address the cultivation marijuana craft cultivation cooperative issue, because we could really select those farms that would be interested in participating and put them into a district without opening it up to the entire residential zoning district. That idea didn't really go very far because in conversations with the craft marijuana cooperative, they were not receptive to that idea, and my understanding that the planning board, at least certain members of the planning board, were really working to come up with a compromise that could be supported by everyone on the floor of town meeting. They thought that the overlay would defeat that goal.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions for Katie?
From a legal standpoint, do you think that this is tenable for people trying to access this market? I mean, is this democratized bylaws compared to what you're seeing in other communities that are giving people a potential option to get into this industry?
I think this is in fact a very generous bylaw with respect to opening this up to people who are specifically expressing interest to operate. I think that the planning board tried very hard to strike a balance between allowing these uses to take place on existing farms, but trying to impose a level of regulatory oversight that would allow them to mitigate against potential negative impacts. I mean, that was certainly the effort. But in terms of the area that is being included, I think there's sort of very generous allowance of locations in which these uses could locate.
Even with an access of tier 2 in their first year, 10,000 square feet for the entire craft cooperative, or any other people interested in trying to be a part of this process? Is that a feasible and, yeah.
I mean, that has been the debate through this, is the amount of area that should be allowed. Certainly, the planning board took a position of a slow rollout,
And the limitations of one license in the entire town for certain things? A lot of ones
these
here.
are certainly policy calls, so from a legal standpoint, I think these are permissible zoning controls, and certainly this is not the only community that has opted, if this bylaw is passed, for a slow and measured rollout to sort of see how things go. But again, it's a policy call, and certainly the town would have the ability, if they wanted to amend this, to increase the tiers or the number of licenses. Those are certainly all available policy calls for the town to make.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions? Katie, I want to thank you very much for
I have something.
time. Paul, I'm going to be interrupted by Paul, so he can ask you.
You said anybody else, and before I opened my mouth, you.
Go ahead. Well, I didn't hear anybody. Maybe I'm too quick here, but.
That's all right. It really wasn't a question. It was more, I know a lot of work has gone into this, and I did want to acknowledge Katie and Jess and staff, all staff at Town Hall, and the planning board, and the craft cooperative folks, and their attorney, and I know a lot of work has gone into this, and this is a very complex matter. So I just wanted to, again, when we at the board criticize things, or not even criticize, but ask questions or want understanding, it isn't to say that we don't appreciate the work that's been gone into it. So I just wanted to say that.
That was well taken. I thank you for pointing that out and reminding everyone. I'm going to remind people of something. For those of you who don't read the New York Times, Katie, you might find, and other people in this room might find, in the first section of the New York Times today, there was an article written by Thomas Fuller, and I don't want to sound like Bill Maher, but the title is, "Yo, Canada, here's a blunt assessment." And what the article is about, the subtitle is, "What the Country Can Learn from California on Marijuana Legalization." And curiously, one of the people that is quoted in the article is a nearby resident in Wellfleet, a man named Daniel Okren, who I consider a friend, who wrote a book called The End of Prohibition. And I think anybody interested in the legalization of marijuana, and curiously, California is the largest supplier of legal and illegal marijuana to the country. It was also by a referendum, as in Massachusetts, legalized in 2016. So you might find it amusing or interesting to take a look at this article. And I want to thank you again for your efforts with us today, and as Paul said, past efforts, long-standing with our planning board and town staff. So a big thank you.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks, Katie.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Katie.
Thank you.
Aye. Bye.
Bye.
Okay. So, you want to close the work session? And-
No, I think we need to talk about this,
All right.
don't we?
We can
Yeah.
talk about it, yeah. Go ahead.
We have-
I mean, the next time we're talking about, we're voting on it?
Yeah,
Yes.
so you want to talk, yeah, you can probably talk about it.
For
um,
2 seconds.
I don't know, for about a half an hour.
Okay, no.
I do have a comment section that the planning board discussed at their last meeting, and this is still an updated draft.
Is
Is that what you
that was
sent,
in-
the memo you sent me?
No, it's printed out.
Right, oh, right.
It's in the packet,
Okay.
packet, right?
Great, yep,
Thank you.
okay, thanks.
Okay, so I'll just jump in
Yeah,
with
yeah.
both feet.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I'm gonna jump in with both feet and say, you know, I'm not happy about this residential plan. I'm just not, I really don't understand. I mean, we got a good answer from Katie, but I don't understand why we didn't have more support for the overlay district, which I think is fair. And I kind of don't like the idea that, and I'm not saying Katie said this, but she referenced the craft group for not feeling that was a good way to go. You know, my feeling is that the craft group represents a very, small number of people in the community, and I'm happy to have them grow where they're growing, which I still don't know where that is because we haven't been told where it is, but wherever it is, and do an overlay district to continue that. But the idea that everyone in the town needs to jump on board about this new business and new industry and open up residential areas to it, I just find absolutely unacceptable. I mean, I just have to be honest. I haven't said this before, but I just don't think it's fair to the rest of the community. And I don't think that everybody should be able to have a business in their backyard, and that includes marijuana. So, I'm sorry that that the overlay district didn't get more airing, and that we didn't have a time to discuss that as a board. And as far as town meeting goes, I hope it comes up, because I don't understand how that wasn't meeting the group halfway. It seems to me, rather than saying, no, we don't want to do any of this, and I know it's mandated by state to some degree, but it seems to me we went way far in the direction of making it easier for the people who want to grow in residential areas to grow in residential areas, where we haven't, considered all the people in town that might not want that in their residential area.
Well, that's what we'll see on the town floor, and I think part of the discussion is that there's the chicken and the egg discussion, and I'm not saying that this necessarily represents how I feel. I'm just, the other side of the coin is that some people feel like the farms existed before the residential districts.
Well, that's crazy.
Whether
The
that's
fishing
crazy
business-
or not, I'm
yes,
just saying.
That's just a made-up
another
story. That's like
counter
a
argument
folktale.
is that the
Totally,
the
big
farms.
folktale. It is, I'm
But-
sorry, that's a folktale.
Yeah.
And,
Well, just to jump onto what Jan's saying, so do we have any opportunity to reintroduce that notion of the overlay district before town meeting in our commentary or on the 23rd? I don't know.
I would say not before. I mean, you could not recommend this again, and maybe put that in the comment, and then bring it up at town meeting.
Do an amendment on the floor at town meeting for the overlay district. The next part of our meeting is going to take petitioned articles and refer them to the planning board. So now we've got the article the planning board worked with the co-op on for months, and now the co-op has petitioned their own article. And so you've got 2 in play already.
And how many total
Yeah.
signatures did those get?
enough to put them on the ballot.
Over 100, so that represents a number of people
Yeah.
who support.
That's not
It's
the
a-
point. The
yeah.
point is we're talking about what
Yeah.
potentially could go on the warrant.
And the point is, if I may, that does that represent a cooperation with us? I don't think so. I mean, we're asked, as the planning board's asked, to meet these people halfway on their issues, and we do with this very generous bylaw, but then we get 2 petitioned articles that undercut that completely?
Well,
I
some
don't
people are
find
gonna
that
feel like
cooperative.
10,000 square feet in tier 2 is not tenable.
All I'm saying is, it isn't,
So-
that doesn't represent to me that we're working together. It represents to me that we did all this work, the planning board, I certainly did all of this work. And then, right before we go to town meeting, we get 2 bylaws that undercut all the work.
I don't feel like they undercut all the work. If you look
Okay,
at
that's
the
my-
if you look at the 2 charts,
my-
that's not a complete undercutting.
Well, it changes it. All I'm saying is, it just,
They're almost identical. with
then why
some-
do it?
But the bylaw isn't just the chart. There's
Yeah.
stuff
No,
that goes around the bylaw.
It's true. It's
Yeah, and
true.
why would they do that?
So we
If we're working
shouldn't talk
together.
about their bylaw. I brought it
Yeah,
up
we
just
haven't.
simply
Right.
as a point.
Right.
You will have an opportunity, I think we may want to move our October 23rd meeting a little earlier in the day to give us more time. Or we could hold a meeting, another meeting this week if you want, another work session.
Well, it's up to the rest of my colleagues how they feel. I just had to say how I feel. And,
So,
you
Well,
know,
I'm
you
gla-
can, you know,
I'm glad that you
that's how I feel.
voiced how you feel. I think it's important that everyone on this board
Yeah.
do that, because I think it's instructive, to hear from everyone. I would like to remind everyone at this point of what Paul said, going back to the house size thing. If this fails, we are, and I don't think it's appropriate to talk about the the petition bylaws. If this fails, we're back to step 1, and as Paul pointed out with the houses, then we're basically where we are in terms of existing bylaws with respect to marijuana cultivation, and I've read, I don't pretend to understand all of it, the state statute would apply, but then, the issues of farming, I like the term market gardening because they're not farms. Truro has no farms.
Thank you.
Well,
Maybe
actually,
one
it
or
has
two,
one
yeah.
or two at most. They're the market gardeners who, see dollar signs in this. The importance of making a codified regulatory format, which the planning board has presented town meeting with, whether it's liked or not, I think it's important that this board, as the policy-making board, be prepared to answer and address things at town meeting. Ultimately, that's how we feel as individuals, but collectively, are we gonna, make a
It would
a
really help
stance?
if everybody read this, even though
I
it
have.
seems laborious. Has everybody on the board read this?
I've read it.
Okay, so that's, at least,
I think-
we can all stand by that and say that, which really helps, I think, because some people have questioned whether or not everybody's.
And getting to the kind of the subjective part of what I've listened to here, I think it's also important to remind people, because there are almost daily things in the press, the written press, I don't know about the other press, I don't pay a lot of attention to. Other communities in the Commonwealth are struggling exactly with what we are. And there are other places, Jan, where have said no.
I know that. There are plenty of them.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
the issues that you're raising, you're not alone. And I think that, town meeting, whatever the legislative body of the town decides to do, we have the opportunity to provide our input to that decision. I think that's our role. And I just want people not to forget what Paul said. Without a bylaw in place, we go back to a very different environment. And maybe, Jess, you could speak to that.
Yes, well, the whole passing of bylaw, whether the planning board talked a lot about that, and there are members who are really opposed to having any sort of marijuana establishment in the residential district. But the majority of the planning board really did feel that, we have to come up with a bylaw that will pass at town meeting, as opposed to one that's, that we can, everyone on the planning board really loves. So, trying to, work with the co-op and listen to we had 3 public hearings on this, and then we closed the public hearing to public comment and just had open deliberation for 4 meetings. So the planning board really did consider all of the public comment and the feedback on whether or not to have this in the residential district. But like we said, in the back of their minds, they're thinking we need a bylaw that'll pass. Otherwise, since Truro has so many farms, if this doesn't pass, our underlying zoning bylaw will just come into effect, and then, you know, wherever farming is allowed, cultivation could be permitted. They still have to go through the state process and apply and get their licenses, but they could still then cultivate in the residential district, or they could, you know, retail, wherever retail is allowed and whatnot, so.
And
That
it-
was the importance of the bylaw,
Yeah.
yeah.
And in terms of, so if the bylaw doesn't pass, any of the bylaws, and we revert to the Cannabis Control Commission regulations and our existing
Zoning
bylaw, there's
yeah.
still the host community agreement. And I know there's been some conversations at the state level about the level of restrictions that the host community agreement can implement. Would we be able, through the host community agreement, if and none of these pass, take some of the elements of any of the zoning proposals and include them in a host community agreement?
I'm not 100% sure on that question. I didn't get an answer from Katie on that one. I'm not sure, actually. I don't want to speak to that.
Sure,
But
no,
I
I-
can get
Find
you an
out,
answer
you know,
on
we
that.
could
Yeah,
get-
I can
yeah.
definitely get
Yeah.
you an answer on that. Because you have to have something in place before you went to the state to apply.
You know, the other thing I was going to say is that, you know, again, I think the planning board did the best they could in a very difficult situation. And they were trying to balance a lot of competing interests and, you know, trying to help a group of people who are committed to doing a new business in Truro, which is a great thing. And their role is really land use, and to come to us with what, in terms of a zoning and land use policy. Our job as a select board is to look at the interest of Truro as a whole. And so the challenge that we have is to not just look at the land use issues, but the issues that would affect Truro as a whole. And that goes beyond what happens in somebody's neighborhood, or whether they're in a butter or not, but really how does it affect Truro as a whole? And that, you know, there are pros and cons on both sides of that. So, you know, that's part of where I am thinking is that, you know, yes, there are certain things in the bylaw from a land use standpoint that I have questions about, but then there's this other issue for me about what's in the best interest of Truro as a whole, and how can we accomplish that?
Yeah, I think that's been the conundrum all along with developing this and trying to get something that will pass at town meeting that's a reasonable, you know, compromise that does both. We certainly did the research for the overlay district, and we have the list of existing farms available for an overlay district.
That were 1.5 acres or more.
Right. So it would simply have to be a change at town meeting if you all decided you wanted to propose that.
So would that remove the use table and put in an overlay district?
We would amend, the overlay district you'd have to amend the zoning map in our bylaw and include
Take the use table out. And put
Exactly.
the zoning map in instead.
yeah.
Okay.
We would amend our zoning bylaw, or our zoning map, and then we could have a definition section within our overlay
You
section.
might
of our
need
bylaw.
if you wanted to allow uses in the business or commercial districts, you might still need to do the table for that, right?
Right, because our overlay district would just be the farm parcel.
Would just be the-
Or the cultivation parcels, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so when we kind of got the feedback from the club that they weren't really interested, this was when I think we were 1 or 2 public hearings away from being at the end. So we kind of just we decided to let it be and just continue moving forward with what we had. Because Katie, you know, she felt that, you know, we still do have, with the site plan review and special permit review, we still do have a lot of local review. It's not like we're just gonna be, you know, that was kind of an issue that some of the planning board members, you know, needed to absorb, was that we're not allowing these uses by right. Everyone still will have to go through the local processes, local zoning processes.
And are there, I meant to ask this before, are there butter notification requirements that are built into the special permit, or the site plan review and the special permit process?
Yes, yeah, so we adopt all of the criteria of the special permit and site plan review. And then for site plan review, we actually took the residential criteria for the site plan review, and then we added some of the criteria from the commercial site plan review as well, because the residential site plan review criteria was a bit more in tune with, you know, what we're, you know, trying to protect and preserve in the bylaws. So, yep, so we would, but butters notices, absolutely.
Okay, great, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure.
You've been very
Happy
helpful.
to be here.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So are we ready to move on? Because if we are, I'm gonna,
Need a motion to
I need a
close.
motion to close the work
Wait.
session. Oh,
I'm just kidding, just kidding. Just kidding.
Come on. Come on,
Oh,
Paul.
come on, Paul.
Yeah, come
That was good.
You got everybody laughing now. A relief.
Oh, God.
I need a motion to close the work session.
So moved?
Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion to close the work session, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
That was unanimous. Moving on, I am now going to convene an open, regular meeting of the Truro Select Board on Tuesday, October 16th, 2018. Should I go through introductions now?